It's indeed the Jeff Santos Show that you're tuning into. The rain has seemingly come to an end here in Greater Boston, thankfully. It seemed like it was going to come right through the window, the lightning there for a second. But all is good as we prepare for Game 1 of the World Series between the LA Dodgers and the Boston Red Sox, 8 o'clock Eastern time tonight. It is great to have our next guest. He is, of course, kind of a Renaissance man, a good musician, a hell of a journalist, and a good friend on top of all of that. He's the regular contributor to the Daily Kos, of course, the Capitol Hill Times, and executive director of Democracy Watch, and, of course, a weekly contributor to this very program, the Jeff Santos Show. Mr. Mark Taylor-Canfield joining us. You're on a boat this week, are you, man?
No, I am reporting live from City Hall, Jeff, right, where there's a major council meeting on the city's new budget. So everybody in the city that represents any kind of interest is here to submit their budget proposals to the council. So it's huge. The City Hall is standing room only right now. The lobby is completely full, and there are lines all the way around the block. So this is huge. Everybody, all of the community organizers are here. Representatives from First Nations people are here. I was asked to actually come and speak for the issue of affordable housing and the need for an increase in funding for affordable housing in Seattle. As I've reported before, Seattle and Martin Luther King Jr. County have both declared civil emergencies due to a mass increase in homelessness. And there's also been a big pushback against a tax on large corporations in Seattle that would have funded affordable housing programs. But big corporations like Amazon and Boeing and Starbucks and others got together and convinced the city council to overturn their own vote on that issue, which, of course, all of the housing activists in the city were very upset about. And I just basically, Shama Sawant called it out-and-out bribery by Jeff Bezos and Amazon. And she said that they were holding the city hostage. And even Moody's Investments, said that Amazon has a probably larger than should be allowed political influence on the city of Seattle. It's just part of the nature of the business world here. But yes, I'm down here at City Hall, and it's great to see everybody in the community out. I mean, everybody and their brother and their sister and their mother and their dog is here. And I've actually written a pretty extensive article at Daily Kos called "Seattle's Lack of Affordable Housing Hits Home." So that's a lot of the issues I'm going to hit today during the hearing are in that article. It's just a history sort of Seattle's lack of support for low-income artists, galleries, things like that. It's like a lot of cities across the country has become quite gentrified. Although for some reason, Jeff, I don't know how it's happened. We still have a heart and soul here, and there's still a lot of great music and art going on, but it's been very difficult for the artists to survive here. And it's very difficult for low-income people to afford to live here. Skyrocketing rents.
Well, no, I mean, it is. It's, we were talking earlier about some of the top issues in the commentary section of the program. And, in places like Seattle and Los Angeles and New York and Boston and Chicago, some of the bigger cities, housing is a massive issue. And I applaud you and Ms. Swan and others for really sticking to this issue when so many other city council members are sold out and gone along with corporations. And I think this is sort of this is the story of today. We were talking earlier on a taping we did today with our friend Kim Reed of Dark Money, the great documentary. And this comes into play in local areas. Developers come in. It could be Amazon. It could be, Joe's Construction, that has, all the money, or it could be Donald Trump. Whoever has money and has the access to, to buy land, this is what happens. And we don't, this is the other piece that really annoys me, is that the people who are in control are private, wealthy individuals. In some cases, the government has sold out and has given them land where it's, it should be for public use, a park, a subway, an area for, people to sort of, be able to come together, whatever it might be. And yet it ends up being another apartment or high-rise condo and high-price condo. I don't know how you feel about that, but to me, that's where we have been, particularly over the last 30 or 40 years, all around the country.
Yes, Miami, Brooklyn, for sure, Boston. Yeah, I mean, San Francisco is one of the prime examples of a West Coast city that's gone that route. Luckily, Portland isn't quite there yet, but Seattle is well on its way to being the new San Francisco in terms of the cost of living and the control by big money of the culture. Not to criticize San Francisco in other ways, it's a brilliant culture, and a lot of the people in Seattle, the reason we have this Northwest culture is a lot of it did come from San Francisco and that area of the country. But today, we're facing all sorts of serious challenges. And in Seattle, which is supposed to be one of the most progressive cities in the country, we have a challenge with homelessness. And so we have to ask ourselves, what do we stand for as a community? What are our values, right? And who are our political representatives really representing? Are they representing people who are homeless and need a place to live? Or are they representing huge corporations that have, multi-million-dollar lobbying departments and people who, incredible, law firms behind them? In Seattle, we're seeing the same thing that you've seen everywhere else across the country. And what's surprising to me, Jeff, is that the only folks that seem to have a real answer to this are actually some of the Democratic Socialists, because they just tend to come along and speak up on these issues of, housing, affordable housing. They consider it a right. And I remember when Bernie Sanders came to Seattle, when I first met him years ago, he had been mayor of Burlington, and they, and part of his platform was that, housing is a human right. So he came to Seattle long before this latest skyrocketing rent bubble, and was already talking about needing rent control. Part of the issue here is that we don't have rent control in Seattle, and our state legislature has prohibited it in this state. So it's ridiculous. We have to overturn that, and we need to get more progressives and Democrats into the state legislature so that we can overturn that. And it looks like with these midterm elections, there will be a few more Democrats in both the House and the Senate of our state legislature, so we might be able to move on some of those issues. But it's really the Democratic Socialists who have come along and spoken, truth to power. A lot of the corporate Democrats around here are just like they are in the rest of the country. They put on progressive clothes, and then when they get into office, they show their true colors, which is they stand for power and prestige and wealth, So we've seen that, unfortunately, a little bit with our own mayor, Denny Turkin, the former U.S. attorney who became mayor here.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I think you end up having, to sort of, use the vernacular of the early 90s, all these people would dress up in flannel to sort of, look like Kurt Cobain and company and Dave Grohl. And, they were just as corporate as, the guys that worked at the financial district on Wall Street or any other financial capital. I mean, they just wanted to look cool. And that's what we end up with people. I mean, it's not just 25-year-olds. It's, it's 50-year-olds and older. And I just think that we have so many people. I mean, the Wendell Potter example, our weekly contributor, who's the whistleblower from Cigna Health Insurance, he gave us this list that, is just appalling. These are Democrats. These are relatively middle of the road to liberal members, who say they're for single payer. There's 171, I think, including Joe Crowley. And yet they take money from the top 5 pharmaceutical companies. I mean, health insurance companies, probably pharmaceutical too, but, it's disgusting. It's hypocritical, but this is where our politics are today.
There are other issues, Jeff. I'm glad you brought that up, because there are other issues that aren't being addressed, by a lot of my colleagues in the media that do come out during these sort of populist progressive revolutions going on across the country and here in City Hall today in Seattle is the fact that there's also a crisis with our justice system that needs to be addressed. There's also a crisis in our environmental management, even in the Northwest, where we're potentially going to have oil tankers bringing tar sand oil from Alberta down the Puget Sound. There are all sorts of issues that aren't being addressed. The lack of adequate funding for public education. All of these things need to be addressed by progressive Democrats and independents and socialists or whatever. But I mean, that anybody who can see these issues needs to stand up and speak out and step forward at these kinds of city hall meetings and in campaigns for office across the country, because unfortunately the two major parties are just not addressing some of the major issues that people face every day, and that's a shame. That needs to change.
It certainly does. It certainly does. We're talking here with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield. And look, folks, this is what we're talking about is, good journalists, people pushing the envelope like our good friend Melissa Tomlinson was, talking about, the barracuda of the great badass teachers movement. I just think that, this is the only way. I saw the other day, Mark, that Bernie Sanders is making a trip across the country for a lot of candidates, including in California. I'm not sure if he is going to Seattle, but I know there's not as many competitive races there, maybe with the exception of Miss Smith, I guess. But what do you make of this for Bernie? I mean, he is both raising money and getting people excited. And some of the people who we love here on the show, people like Barbara Lee, is going to be campaigning for her in the Oakland area. I think it's really important that Bernie's message gets out there. This is an important time, just 2 weeks from the midterms. Your thoughts?
Yes, well, I don't know of any scheduled appearances in Seattle at this point. I think he's going to end this West Coast tour in California, unless something changes at the last minute. I mean, you never know, it could. But I do think that, Washington State is a pretty blue state, so I think it's interesting actually that he is going to Nevada, because that's been a real turnaround on some issues.
Yeah.
There've been big movements towards legalization of marijuana, and Bernie Sanders got a lot of support during
they
the
screwed him in 16 there.
Yes. And there was also some controversy, with people walking out at the state convention and things like that. So, Nevada was very controversial, but he definitely stirred some things up there. And I thought it was really interesting listening to the program earlier when you were talking with Robert Craig about progressive populism. And you both seem to have, that well analyzed and understood in a way that I think a lot of political consultants, unfortunately, and media folks across the country don't get yet. But yeah, I mean, it's been happening in the Northwest, and Bernie Sanders is a part of that. And yes, Sarah Smith is running against a 21-year incumbent here who's a Washington State member of Congress, congressman. And he is actually pretty progressive, but as we mentioned before, who's standing up against the excessive military budget,
yes.
$700 billion. Well, guess what? Sarah Smith is. And Adam Smith accepts a lot of money from defense contractors. And of course, this is the region of Boeing, right? So of course there's a lot of defense contracts up here. And, so once again, a progressive Democrat's progressive credentials are being challenged by a challenger who actually got through the primaries, because in Washington State, it's a instant runoff system, 1 and 2. It doesn't matter whether they're Republican or Democrat. So 2 Democrats got through. So in that district in Washington State, you'll be voting for 2 Democrats in November. By the way, the mail-in ballots have already arrived, Jeff, so people are already voting in Washington State, and I'm sure that the majority of voting will happen long before the November deadline. It just tends to happen when you have mail-in ballots like we do here.
Let me ask you, do you guys, unlike Oregon, or do you do the exact same thing? Oregon only votes by mail. Isn't that the case?
That is true in the state elections here. Yeah, it's only mail-in. You can actually drop your mail or your ballot in a drop box, which is an official ballot drop box at most public buildings. There's one right here that I'm looking at outside City Hall in Seattle. And you can also mail them. There was an issue, I had an issue with some of these items just because, the fact that you were forcing people to buy a stamp, which, maybe it's 45 cents, but still that could qualify as a poll tax at some point. So finally this year, the King County Elections Commission got together and decided, you know what, let's just subsidize it and make it post-paid. So thank you for doing that. So now you don't have to fumble around for a stamp at the last minute or go to the post office. You can actually drop it off in your mailbox or at a drop box. And I wish there were a few more drop boxes, and it would be good if we put a little bit more funding into that because there are elderly and disabled people who have a hard time getting across town, when in the old days, you would walk to your local church or school. So, there are advantages, though, just in terms of the fact that people can have such a long period of time to peruse the voter's pamphlet and think about the issues before they decide to vote. And you can just sit at home with a cup of coffee and your partner and discuss it. It's not something that you now go in. We're not going into polling booths and pulling the curtain and punching tabs anymore. There's no hanging chads, Jeff, in Washington.
Well, I'm just wondering, though, does that take away, though, the idea, and is it also safe, in terms of, the excitement of Election Day? I mean, it's November 6th. It's not November 1st or October 28th. I'm just wondering if, I think you should be able to do both. And I don't know if Seattle has just got rid of all their ballot machines or their voting machines, but, maybe there's, a way to sort of be able to balance that. The other problem, of course, is everything is up to the individual secretaries of states, which to me is problematic because, you have the conservative idiots like Kovac and Husted in Ohio and Kemp and who's the fox guarding the hen house in Georgia running against first African-American woman Governor Abrams, candidate for governor. And he's the Secretary of State as well. I mean, it's just outrageous stuff.
It's flashbacks to Catherine Harris, it's scary. Ohio, during those elections where the Secretary of State,
John
and
Kerry.
You've had Greg Palast on your show, and
it was on last night.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, the Georgia voter suppression is outrageous, and yet if you talk to folks, like Mike Malloy, who's a friend of mine, and I've done his show before. He's down there outside of Atlanta, and he'll tell you, Mark, it's been like this for 200 years.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, I mean,
this is nothing new.
Vernacular, but, a lot of Neanderthal concepts that still exist. And I think that's very problematic.
There is something I should add about this too, is that on Thursday, the Center for American Progress is having a huge conference on hate speech, and the internet. And I think it's going to be very important because, we're getting to the point where the right wing in the Republican Party is so extreme that, you could get secretaries of state who are crazy KKKers or something. And so we're really worried, at Democracy Watch News about not only where the media and press freedom is going in the United States, but also just straight up democratic processes. And so it's very important, I think. I've actually registered, and you can go to the Center for American Progress and register online to participate in this conference that's happening on Thursday morning. And you can live stream it. They'll be live streaming the conference too. I think it's really important that people get together and just confront the racism and the hatred that's out there in the media and on the internet. I think, it's been on the radio for a long time when Rush Limbaugh and,
sure,
folks like Glenn Beck and, who's from this neck of the woods, unfortunately, we're out there sprouting hatred and prejudice. But now the internet has given them an opportunity for a lot of people to create whole websites devoted to that, and it's just really sad. So as a society, I think
we use the market, the medium to preach hate, and we've been doing it for years on radio to a certain extent, on television, and obviously online on the internet. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff out there. Mark, we're going to end a little early today because the Red Sox are in the World Series, and we're going to devote a few minutes here before we go off. But all the best tonight in the City Council, and I think, the fact as a journalist and as an activist that you have a chance to be a voice there for all of us and for many of your friends and family, that's wonderful. So thank you, my man. You are a cool dude, and you are somebody we're proud of here on the show. So thank you, and give him hell tonight.
Back at you, Jeff. And if people want to follow what I'm doing, you can go to the MTC Report at YouTube. But I'm also out there writing at Truth Out. I got some articles there and Daily Kos and all over the place. So I want to thank everybody for supporting your show, and go Boston.
Thank you. We need it. Well, we always want to have good vibes from our friends in Seattle. Beat LA. Thank you, Mark. Look, it's this time of the year where, if you're a baseball fan as I am and our great producer Jason is, this is great. This is baseball at its best, playing in the great Fenway Park, where, you're going to see, great players on both sides. The likes of JD and Mookie and Bellinger and Matt Kemp and Kershaw and, so many great players. And of course they moved to another stadium, which is newer, even though it's 50 years old, in the case of, Dodger Stadium. So this should have an opportunity for a classic, World Series. And, I'm hoping, and I'm picking the Red Sox in 6 games. We're going to hopefully have a chance to talk to Nick Cafardo over the coming days and get a perspective, of some of the big issues. I know the Red Sox today added Drew Pomerantz to their lineup and, to their bullpen, I should say. So that should be fascinating. We'll see, how much that plays a factor. I guess Wright did not make it, the knuckleballer. So all of that. And I think it's really critical that for so many of us, this is something that brings out the best in New England. And if you are from out of town and you're visiting Boston, it is great to have you here, and we hope you are treated very well, whether you're a Dodger fan or a reporter from visiting from New York and around the country or around the world for that matter, as this is an international sport. We hope you are treated well, and I think it's an important time. Jason, if you have anything to say on that, I know you are rooting for the Red Sox too, and I have a feeling that you're going to be glued to the TV over the next several nights as well.
Yeah, that's for sure. They just had James Taylor doing the national anthem.
Yes, I see that.
Yaz throwing out the first pitch. So goosebump times. It's a good time to be a Red Sox fan. I'm excited.
Indeed. Well, again, folks, tonight, 8:09, I think the first pitch goes off, and we're looking for the Red Sox going to win in 6. I want to thank Jason for producing this broadcast. Of course, thank our guest, Mark Taylor-Canfield, of course, Melissa Tomlinson, Robert Craig, and we want to thank all of you for listening, folks. This is a show that is something that we love to do, that I love to do, and we love you for listening back. All right, it's that time to say, folks, keep on fighting, because I'll be there to fight with you. My name is Jeff Santos, and it's my time to say I gotta go.
You're listening to 1590 WSMN Nashua.
USA Radio News.
I want to see the facts first. Look, Saudi Arabia's been a really great ally. They've been one of the biggest investors, maybe the biggest investor in our country. I should have a pretty good report very soon.
President Trump earlier today talking to reporters at the White House. Now, the president also said that the cover-up of journalist Jamal Khashoggi's death that was executed by the Saudis was one of the worst cover-ups in history. Tuesday's Mega Millions jackpot is set for just over $1.6 billion. Now, the reason we're seeing such a spike in jackpots is the price of a Mega Million ticket went from $1 up to $2, and they also added a number of mega balls to the game, which made it more challenging or more difficult to hit. All that being said, these people still think they have a chance of winning the big one.
I'm holding the lucky money right here. I'm going to win.
Should have a lucky ticket here.
$1,300 worth.
This is USA Radio News. What are Americans most worried about these days? USA Radio Network's Chris Barnes has the results of a survey.
Drug addiction and the affordability of college. Those two issues are more on the minds of Americans now than they were 2 years ago, according to the latest study from the Pew Research Center. It says the percentage of Americans who thought drug addiction was a, quote, very big problem grew from 56% in 2016 to 68% now. 63% of Americans are concerned about the affordability of college now. That's up from 52% who were very concerned about it 2 years ago. On the flip side, the survey finds people are much less concerned about terrorism these days.
Tuesday's Mega Millions jackpot is set for just over $1.6 billion. John Crow will be the person who calls those lucky numbers. He talked about what it's like for him.
It's exciting to know that I'm calling numbers that can change somebody's life.
You're listening to USA Radio News. One of the biggest misconceptions out about Ronald Reagan is that he was always a conservative. Well, quite the contrary. He grew up in a house, and his father was extremely liberal. I had a chance to chat with Bob Spitz. He's the author of a new book titled Reagan, An American Journey. And one of the things we discussed was when Reagan became a conservative.
You know, what happened while he was in Hollywood, he became the president of the Screen Actors Guild, and he did that because it was a union, and he was a union man. But he had joined many committees, political committees, while he was in Hollywood, and he came to believe that they were being infiltrated by communists and people who were really too far left. He really felt like it was going to bring the demise of first, perhaps, Hollywood and then the Soviet Union. And so Reagan's politics began to skew from the left to the right. And he happened to have been really pals in Hollywood with two actors, Dick Powell and Robert Montgomery. And they were passionate Republicans, and they went to work on him. And so you can see the whole shift in the book. It happens gradually, but it happens decidedly that he moves from the left to the right and really embraces conservatism.
They're coming up through social movements, but that's going to be a process, and that's what's all. And eventually some of them have to run for national office, and obviously Bernie has shown the potential there. Where Bernie has problems, as you know, is since he's in such a rural state, is Bernie doesn't appeal all that well to a lot of urban voters, especially young people of color.
Well, I think it's important that that the Democrats look again as Bernie as part of the ticket in 2020, and whether or not the other person is a minority, is a female, maybe they're both. Maybe we're talking about Kamala Harris, or we're talking about Gabbard, or we're talking about, a number of other, Barbara Lee, as an example. I mean, I think that understanding that, I don't think that we should think about identity politics, but, if there is a good progressive, and I mentioned Barbara Lee because she understands, that we spend too much money in the military, that we need health care for all and so forth. Yet she also understands that, the decay and racism in the communities in places like Oakland, which she represents, are also critical. So maybe that is where we need to start thinking, not about a more moderate person. I remember in 88, the idea was Dukakis, a progressive, a liberal, would choose a more conservative guy from Texas, Lloyd Benson, similar to what Kennedy did with Johnson. To me, that's crazy thinking today. I think that if you have two progressives and they represent different parts of the demographics that can get people out to vote, I think that's where you should go. Your thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of the consultant class still thinks it's about being a centrist.
Yes, I know.
When in fact, that's not
the losing proposition.
Polling. It's about how you talk about it. It's about being culturally competent, right, in rural areas and with working class voters generally. there was a language in Chicago. So back in the days of the Daily Machine, there were epic battles between white progressive kind of leaders from more upper-class parts of the city and the Machine. And part of it was that, you know, they were anti-corruption and spoke for the language of kind of urbane liberalism. But part of it was that the way they talked about it, you couldn't appeal to Polish voters or Irish voters or Italian voters, that there was probably a way to convey it through different messengers. You know, just the waspish kind of liberal goo-goo reformer was never going to appeal no matter what they say. So it wasn't the content, it was the messenger and it was the cultural competence, right?
Right.
To talk to folks. And that's what it comes down to. And you need to construct tickets and candidates up and down the ticket that are appealing to the whole possible spectrum, because you can't ignore people of color, African Americans or Latinos either in doing this. You can't tilt too far to trying to get disaffected rural voters, because then you lose your base. So there's a way to do both of it. Now, Barack Obama did very well that way, actually, and did very well across rural Wisconsin. But then again, Bernie Sanders defeated Hillary Clinton in 71 of 72 counties in the Wisconsin primary. The only one she won was Milwaukee County, the most diverse one.
Right. Well, I just think that there's a need here. And I think the other thing, too, is that, and we hope to be in the middle of it, because obviously we're here in the New Hampshire, media market with Boston here. And obviously there will be, like where you are in Wisconsin and Iowa, there'll be a lot of focus in the early goings of 2019, for these discussions to take place. And I would invite people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren to come on this show. I think that progressives talking to each other and talking about the diversity of the needs and the cultural connection. I think those are really, really important pieces here, because particularly if you're a Washington-based politician, a non-governor, and right now 5 of the leading candidates, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, are all senators. And I'm not saying that, they don't have the ability to communicate like a governor would, but I can tell you, having seen the film Dark Money, and Mr. Bullock, the Montana governor, has a different way of communicating, as does Beto O'Rourke, by the way. Of course, was a member of Congress, or was. I think that way of connecting to people, to inspiring people, is also something that we need to think about. And I think it was a great point you just made, that, in Chicago, that if you can't communicate, with the guy, Joe Sixpack, who's Italian or Polish or Irish, then, that's problematic.
No, absolutely. And so there are all these subcultures that across our country you need to be able to communicate with as a party. Not each politician is going to be conversant in all of those things. And then there's a generational difference, obviously, in what is appealing. I mean, David Kuznets, the speechwriter for Bill Clinton, wrote a book called Speaking American, and his main argument was that a lot of liberals didn't really speak American, that you could put liberalism in an American way. And Bill Clinton was actually quite brilliant at that. Unfortunately, he didn't mean it in a lot of cases.
Yes.
But he could have. I mean, I kind of hoped that back in 92 he would turn out to be way more progressive than he had seemed to be as governor of Arkansas. Unfortunately, I was greatly disappointed.
Yeah, you're not the only one.
But you can learn a lot. I mean, he was a great communicator. The problem wasn't his communication skills or his ability to relate to people. His problem was more of an ethical problem, as far as what really mattered to him was what was in his political advantage in the short term. That was what was in the interest of average Americans in the long term.
There's no doubt, and that is indeed the case. We're talking with our good friend Robert Craig here in the remaining minutes of our first segment. Again, folks, if you are listening to us online and you're hearing all this thunder and lightning, we are, under a major thunderstorm and rain So, but we're okay. We're inside. That's the most important thing. Finally, do you sense that where we are now with the I think mean-spiritedness, the real sort of attack dog that the Trumps are doing to Democrats, they're the mobs and so forth. I think that this is going to backfire because I don't really believe that independent voters, and I think a lot of independent voters voted for Trump, particularly a lot of people who were Trump voters, who were Obama voters in 8 and 12, who went over to Trump because they didn't see anything happening on their economic concerns. But I don't think those people are going to be, motivated to move to Trump with this sort of, scorched earth policy. Your thoughts on that? Because to me, I don't think the Democrats should basically, do the Michael Avenatti idea and throw a bomb back at, the headquarters of Donald Trump. This idea of, grenade for grenade has been, talked about. To me, you can be tough and you can answer back with solutions. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm more concerned than you are, I think. I think that if this election is about health care and pre-existing conditions, which the Democrats are making a great job of making it about, I thought that for 5 years. We're finding campaign lit we did in 2012 that is identical to what's being used now in 18 on pre-existing conditions that we did at Fifth National Wisconsin. So we're doing well there, but unfortunately, animus against immigrants is way worse than has even been reported in most mainstream media. And it goes beyond Trump's base. And even goes well into the Democratic base. And so, fortunately, I think Trump is so over the top, he turns off a lot of socially minded independents and Democrats who hold anti-immigrant feelings because it's so over the top with Trump, right? It's all, calling Mexicans rapists and murderers is probably only effective with his base. Right, because people know a lot of Mexican Americans, and clearly they're hardworking members of our community, right, and that's lived experience. But I do think that the reason he's going to town on this the way he is, and it very much is proto-fascism, revving up hatred against one group, is
no
because
doubt about that.
There really is polling that shows that this is the one thing he has. Can he make this whole election with immigration? Probably not, though the timing of this caravan is not helpful. And believe me, if you want an October surprise, the Trump people are actually getting the caravan through Mexico so it can create a crisis at the right time, because that's probably more effective than having the war with Iran, which is the other possible option here to try to.
They're trying to find every element to this, and that's disgusting. It's sad, but that's the Republican way, and that's obviously the Trump way too. Robert, it's great having you on, my friend. Hopefully, the Democratic Party and others will listen to us and move in a better direction than current situation. Thank you, my friend. We'll talk to you next Tuesday.
Thank you, Jeff. Always a pleasure. Take care.
Pleasure's always ours. It is the Jeff Santos Show. We're right back after this timeout.
You're listening to 1590 WSMN Nashua.
USA Radio News.
I love our country, and our country has taken second fiddle. If you look at the trade deals, and nobody knows it better than me, I'm knocking out some of the worst deals I've ever seen, where we're giving all of our wealth, all of our money to other countries, and then they don't treat us properly. Where we're protecting other rich countries, very, very rich countries, including, by the way, a country that happens to be very much in the news, Saudi Arabia, immensely wealthy, and we're taking care of their military for a fraction of the cost. Not fair to us.
President Trump going into a little bit more detail about his comments last night at a Houston rally where he said, I'm a nationalist. The $1.6 billion Mega Millions jackpot drawing will be tonight at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, and the Dow was down 125 points to close the day at 25,191. This is USA Radio News.
An official message from Medicare. Open enrollment ends soon.
So now's the time to be open-minded.
Look at everything, like prescription drug plans and Medicare Advantage plans from private insurers.
Why? Because plans change. So can your health needs.
I found lower costs and extra benefits and saved money.
Open to something better? Visit Medicare.gov or call 1-800-MEDICARE today.
Open enrollment ends December 7th.
Paid for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Gallup reports a job approval rating for President Trump has increased to 44% in mid-September. USA Radio Network's John Clemens has more.
The latest results of Mr. Trump's job approval of over 1,500 adults may be benefiting from the strong employment numbers. And despite the intense political environment in recent weeks, with the national media concentrating on negative news from the administration, Mr. Trump's numbers continue to improve. Members of the GOP indicated 90% job approval rating, while those identified as Democrats or leaning that way gave Mr. Trump a 40% job approval rating. I'm John Clemens.
Former Supreme Court Justice and first woman appointed to the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor, announced today that she was diagnosed with dementia and is withdrawing from a post-retirement career that included speaking engagements. Quick look at your numbers on Wall Street. Currently, the Dow is down over 300 points on this Tuesday. You're listening to USA Radio News. Capitalism can receive a bad rap sometimes, and sometimes it's because people feel that capitalism equals greed. Economist, journalist, and historian Adrian Wooldridge joined up with Alan Greenspan, and they wrote a new book titled Capitalism in America, A History. I had a chance to chat with Wooldridge, and one of the things we discussed was capitalism and greed.
Everybody's greedy. You know, rich people are greedy, poor people are greedy. You know, the people have been greedy throughout human history. You know, capitalism is something that developed really from the mid-17th, mid-18th century onwards, and is based upon, you know, business, entrepreneurialism, corporations existing. Capitalism is not synonymous with greed. It's not just synonymous with everybody doing their own things. In order to have capitalism, you need to have a complicated set of institutions that work, many of which are underwritten by the government. You need stock markets, you need corporations, you need freedom of exchange, and you need a legal system which enforces contracts. So capitalism is not anarchy, capitalism is not greed, capitalism is a highly organized, sophisticated mode of exchange. And one of the things that happens with capitalism is that you get growth becoming endemic in a society. We tend to imagine that getting richer is a natural thing in human existence. It's not.
Wooldridge also told me that he believes once we can get our costs of health care under control, you'll be able to keep more of your own money. For USA Radio News, I'm Tim Berg.
It's 46 degrees. It's 7:05.
From the palatial studios at Emerson College in beautiful downtown Boston, this is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution Radio Network. Rebuilding America, together, investing, activism, and supporting the middle class. Now, here's Jeff.
It is hour 2 of the Jeff Santos Show, and welcome to it. We are live in rainy Somerville, Massachusetts tonight. The rain is supposedly going to move away as the Red Sox look to begin their World Series Game 1 against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Of course, the Dodgers don't get rain. There's rain in Southern California, right? Occasionally they get it, of course. But we will monitor if the game is delayed. Of course, we'll be off the air for first pitch anyways, but we will let you know if there's any reports. I know a lot of baseball fans and sports fans in general want to know all this, but we get another hour of great politics to talk about. We'll talk to Mark Taylor-Canfield at the bottom of the hour and get a taste of the political, social, and world of music, of course, with MTC and his band. As they try to save the older buildings and communities in Seattle. But we start this hour in our Teacher Tuesday segment, and it is always great to talk to our good friends at the best name in politics, Badass Teachers, and Melissa Tomlinson, the Barracuda. We stole it from Sarah Palin, and we're never giving it back because it fits Melissa and her sisters and brothers at arms at Badass Teachers. It's great to have her with us on Tuesday, on Teacher Tuesday. And Melissa, welcome back. How are you?
Good. How are you, Jeff?
Doing very well. Doing very well. I want to get into some of the top education issues out there, but I want to bring in something that I was thinking about earlier today when I saw more and more of these folks coming across in the border states of California and Arizona and Texas, and these kids that are coming across. And I wonder the impact that it has on classrooms in those states and wherever they end up going. And, of course, the pressure that is on public school teachers. And to me, this is another reason to, hire more teachers and to have less students in the classroom. You put 40 kids, regardless of what background they are, into a class. It's almost impossible for the teacher to affect all 40 of them, which, to me, actually another interesting part about this is as labor unions fight for better working conditions for their members and in some cases for patients. We have a situation here in Massachusetts, Melissa, where the nurses are fighting for what they call safe patient limits, meaning that if you go into the hospital room, and think about this from your perspective as a teacher, if you have 20 kids that you can deal with and one teacher, a lot easier to deal with that than dealing with 40 kids. And if you're a nurse and you have 15 patients and there's nobody else around, you can't, you obviously have to dedicate your time to these people who are sick. They're not kids who are energetic and some of them want to learn. So I don't know how you feel about this, but to me, a lot of the issues that go around the world of education intersects with the world of education. And, I want to get your thoughts on both of those if you can.
It's funny that you bring this up because actually this has been kind of a hot topic in my circles with discussions for the past 24 hours, especially because of everything going on and the potential rollback of the protections for immigrant children. But we're definitely noticing class sizes increase, particularly for our, what we call in New Jersey, ESL or English as a second language students. And you're right, these students are just like in a hospital when people have suffered a trauma and, they need special care and they need, medicine and they need attention. The students come to us in the same way. They've experienced the trauma of moving home, or moving away from home, leaving, everything that they've known, having to travel, the concern of not knowing whether or not they're going to be staying where they moved to or if they're going to be separated from their parents. And a lot of research has been done on, how trauma affects learning. And this even ties into the Kavanaugh case, right? There was a lot of questions about what Dr. Ford did not remember, and I was listening to a report on a radio station one day about how trauma affects memory and it affects brain learning. So you have all of that to worry about just as the teacher, and then when you bring in the factor of class size and you're not able to give the students the attention that they need to help them heal from these traumatic events, you really become ineffective, and then that spirals into, your own feelings as a teacher and the environment in the school and the classroom. And it just kind of becomes a downward spiral within a school district. Something as small as this can even, break down the good systems that we have in place to support the children.
Right. And I think, I think you and I are probably on the same page, is that, we don't want to see, this destruction of people, being thrown back into extreme poverty, in the cases of people from El Salvador, as an example. I mean, a lot of these folks are literally lining up to have water, never mind, have a decent meal. You get people with, being thrown out of their homes because gangs and military death squads are pushing people out of their own homes and taking over the homes. But at the same time, once they get here, the governor of the United States and these local jurisdictions, need to be able to sort of work and have the right people there. I mean, you just think about trauma. Well, how many school psychologists, are out there? Do you need to hire more? I mean, all these things have to go into play, but we spend, 60% of our non-discretionary dollars in the military. More bombs right. and more bake sales for teachers. We've heard, stories thousands of times, and how many people have to, teachers, and you went through this yourself, I bet, have to, bring your own books, pay for the students to, have certain school supplies and everything else. And this is crazy. I mean, we're a first world country, but we treat our students and our teachers like they're, living in the third world. We all know what happened in Detroit with the idiot that ran Flint into the ground and the water there. He was overseeing Detroit school teachers. I mean, it's screw up, move up kind of world. And I just think that a lot of people don't realize that how much teachers and educators, surround our society and all the impacts that are going on around it, come right into the classroom. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's definitely true. And, on top of that, the teacher, I found, the majority of teachers have that personality and that sense of self that not only do they want to help in the classroom, but they want to help in the community, right? So they'll volunteer for community organizations and they'll help at the food bank. Like I was volunteering at my local food bank for a while. Because we see the bigger picture, we want to help and we want to do everything that we can. But as the demands become harder on us in the classroom, we don't have the time or the strength or the energy to be able to do as much of that outside work as we would like to do. So that's like, kind of a secondary impact that we're seeing as well.
Well, I just think that again, when we spend so much money on the military-industrial complex, so much money on tax cuts for the 1%, so much money on on building stadiums that billionaire owners can build themselves. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think we've been doing this for 40 or 50 years now, and it has affected the people that are on the front lines, teachers, nurses, and people, like that. And of course, the average American who doesn't have lawyers and lobbyists fighting for them. And I then sort of want to take it to the point of California, where there is in efforts like every other state, tragically enough, to privatize schools, I even see now advertising for privatizing fire departments. I think there's a company called Chubb that is private firefighters. I mean, this whole concept of privatize, it's profit over people again. And I just think that, again, the most important profession in my mind in the country is education, right next to healthcare. If you don't educate the future, then the country will eventually dry up and we'll become a third world nation. A lot of wealthy people sending their kids to Harvard and Yale, and prep schools, like Andover and so forth and others. And then, the rest of them are going to be, fighting at the trough. And I think it goes right to the public education need.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And it kind of lends itself to the bigger conversation about what we have as humans as our basic rights, right? And how those rights should be provided for. And that's really missing from the conversation as we see more things being privatized, just like you said. Having the firemen privatized, having different city workers privatized, communication workers. All of those are services that become almost, a need to exist, right? We need specific things to be able to exist as human beings. And when we see this breakdown and this kind of petitioning off and selling of these services, then that puts other people in power and gives them the ability to withhold them from us, to hold it over us, to raise prices, to deny us those services in the past. So it's definitely creating the oligarchical system that we're definitely do not want to see for this country, because it's not going to be any good for the millions of people that we're responsible for.
No, you're so right. We're talking with our good friend, and of course, the associate executive director of Badass Teachers, Melissa Tomlinson, here on the Jeff Santos Show. I'm thinking that because of the fact that California has, the largest state in the country, obviously in Los Angeles, the second largest city in the country, there is, a megaphone of Hollywood there. So it has a major impact on the rest of the 49 states. And, I worry, just as the Supreme Court decision of a couple of years ago, that affected a lot of California teachers, and just as the fact that there is, an effort to sort of find solutions with private answers, and this is frustrating, and I worry that if it takes hold in a place like California, or New York for that matter, and it already obviously has, with the superintendents that have come out of New York, even in the Obama administration, were charter school fanatics. We know about Artie Duncan. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. So are you concerned? I mean, you live in the greater New York area, if you want to include Central and South Jersey into that, I guess. And I think that there is a real need here to kind of push back where the media actually pays attention to some of these things. Your thoughts?
There is a real need. There's a lot that people are not seeing. Excuse me, I have coughing right now.
Okay, you want to get some water, be my guest.
Yeah, give me just 1 second.
Sure, go right ahead. We're talking with Melissa Tomlinson here on the Jeff Santos Show, great assistant executive director of Badass Teachers, and I could not think of a better person to represent the Badass Teachers. Her and Marla Kilfoyle have been great spokespeople for the organization, and we need barracudas, we need fighters, and they are just that. And I think it's going to be important that we get more and more people like this, folks, in leadership positions, and whether it's our friends in the education community, the AFT and the NEA, or it's on the local level in these states that I talked about that are critical, because there is media that pays attention to these things. In a lot of states, smaller media markets, they don't pay attention because there's no media to pay attention to. If you remember the movie Dark Money, that was the Billings, Montana reporter was fired because they got rid of the whole State House Bureau, which is a case around the country today. And so they had to be a freelance guy. And that's how Kim Reed, who we interviewed today on our television taping to be aired on Sunday at 10 a.m., the movie Dark Money. That's the case. Is everything okay, Melissa?
Yes, I'm better now. Thank you very much.
Great.
So we were talking about charter schools and how concerned the public should really be about this. And I was about to tell you about a friend of mine who is a public education advocate, but she happened to be in a conference recently of charter school authorizers to try and find out the process and who exactly is responsible and where the transparency is coming in. And she shared some really disturbing information with me about the Office of Inspector General and how much they actually have to investigate these charter schools that have resulted in like $13.5 million in fines, forfeitures, civil settlements, going anywhere from conspiracy, theft of public funds, theft, bribery. And this is happening by the people that are working for the charter school, grant fraud, contract fraud, bribery, kickbacks, theft, embezzlement by school employees in higher trusted positions. And these are being committed by the school employees, the officials, award recipients, grantees, contractors. So there's a lot that is still being hidden by the charter school industry as far as what's really going on. And then when you think about it, in most states, these charter school funding is set up directly from public education. So that's our public tax money that is being directed illegally into pockets and then legally into pockets by anybody who has an authorizing of a charter school, and then they rent out the space to the charter school itself, who they own as a corporation. So they're almost taking double the money from us that they deserve to be getting for educating a child and profiting off of it on top of that.
It is so disgusting to see what is going on. And, of course, when you have a Republican president and you have a Republican House, Senate, and they control most of the state capitals, and then, when you do have Democrats, you just got a Democratic governor there in New Jersey, how much are they going to willing to stand up to either a Republican legislature or to a more corporate Democratic legislature? I mean, we have here in Massachusetts a very corporate-driven legislature, even though it's a progressive state. And, that's why they get along with the current Republican governor. They go hand in hand, and it's been happening for 30 years. I just think that we really need to push. And I think what Badass Teachers has done, getting behind people like Zephyr Teachout and other progressives, including Bernie Sanders and others, I think is really critical. Because without the support of organizations like Badass Teachers, you're not going to be able to push, in my opinion, toward a progressive agenda, a movement. You guys are critical to that. And I don't know how much you guys realize it, but I mean, if it's not groups like you and our friends at like National Nurses United and that have been pushing on the single-payer health care agenda and have, a safe patients limit in California. I mean, it would be very, very difficult, to have progressive movements, again, like a Bernie or a Warren or somebody, because otherwise these candidates can't do that by themselves. Your views on the role that you guys are playing, not only in the classroom, but in society at large, because I think it's a lot of it is, on their own time. It's not an endorsed, process. That's not you guys roll. So I think it's a really, important piece of what you guys do. And I hope that, you continue to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, we had a conversation about that this weekend, actually, about how hard it is when you're on the inside to actually see and recognize the effect that you've had over the past couple of years or are having right now. Sometimes it gets discouraging because you don't see that, and it helps when other people like you and others recognize that and let us know so that we do continue on, because, this is what we do. This is what I live for at this point.
Well, Melissa, you deserve it. And all the accolades and what you and people like Marla and others have done have been great. I mean, great to this show and great to the country, and that's what we need more of. And I hope that we can, continue to move in that direction. Thank you so much again. If people want to find out more about Badass Teachers, is there a website that they can go to?
Yes, there is. It's www.badassteacher.org, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest.
Fantastic. Check it out, folks. They're the best. It's always great talking to you, Melissa. We will talk to you next Tuesday, and as we get a little closer to November 6th, get your thoughts on what you should be asking candidates in the final days, if you're a citizen, people running for school board and local offices, as well as working and running for Congress, too. Thanks, Melissa. Have yourself a good week.
Thank you. You too, Jeff.
Thank you. This is the Jeff Santos Show. We're going to come right back and talk Seattle politics, Seattle music, and talk to Mark Taylor-Canfield. All this coming up right here on the Revolution Radio Network. It's the Jeff Santos Show. Back in a flash.